Everyone.
Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum to all the fantastic folks here. I'm Mubina Qureshi. I use she and they pronouns, and I am Executive Co-Director at SEWA-AIFW, Asian Indian Family Wellness Program from Minnesota. And a bit of about myself. I'm first generation immigrant, a queer Muslim, a survivor of gender-based violence, arranged marriage, and Gujarat riots. I'm coming from an informal labor class Muslim community with various intersectional experiences with GBV, and that's why this movement is very close to my heart. I serve on the board of SOAR, and it's an absolute privilege to be there with other remarkable, amazing folks. I also serve on the board of Queer Equity Institute in Minnesota and Sarah's Transnational and Transitional Home. And I'm very, very grateful to be here after amazing conversation with Sujata. Aarti, to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are very grateful to have this presentation right after Sujata's talk. That was just amazing. So again, I'm Aarti Raghavachari. I'm the Youth Engagement Representative at SEWA, and I have been working there for 2.5 years now. And so our programming, the youth programming, is centering 13 to 24-year-old South Asians. And I'll keep my bio pretty short and just say that my main language is Tamil, and I also speak Hindi as well. And I also learned Chinese for 8 years. So I'm learning languages and is definitely my thing. And then I'm also super interested in transformative justice and restorative justice. So very happy to present this.
Next slide, please.
And then, of course, I just wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement of where our office resides in Minnesota. We are very grateful for the space that we have, but we do acknowledge that we are on stolen land that has not been ceded back to the respective Indigenous communities. So SEWA-AIFW acknowledges that our office resides on land belonging to the Wakpekute tribe of Dakota Nation in Minnesota-Makosi, which is Minnesota. Wakpekute is part of the Oceti-Sakowin Oyate people of 7 council fires, which includes the Bade Wakantonwan, dwellers by the sacred lake, Sisatonwan, people of the marsh, Wakpetunwan, dwellers among the leaves, Ikhantunwan, people of the end, and Ikhantunwana, people of the little end, and Titunwan, people on the plains, and Wakpekute, shooter among the leaves. And you can go ahead and use that link to see the land that you're resided on as well. And then just before we get started, I do want to offer some brief content and trigger warnings. Mubina and I are, we're very open and we're hopefully very welcoming people. So I hope that you're coming as you are. Feel free to have your cameras on. We'd love to see your faces, but if you're at home and you're in your pajamas, and that's great, feel free to take some water or whatever else you need. And in the later portion, we will have a little bit of a large group discussion and some individual brainstorming. We hope that you can participate because we really value your experiences and your expertise, but feel free to not participate if you cannot. And there will be some very, very brief mentions of physical abuse, transnational abandonment, emotional violence, and South Asian communal violence later on. So once we get into the case studies, we can give a warning for those again. And then a little bit about our agenda. First, just thought we would introduce SEWA once again, and then delving a little bit into the framework. So maybe describing, of course, we just had a fantastic description of restorative justice, but using our interpretation of restorative justice and transformative justice, and then learning a little bit more about how this is applicable for the South Asian diaspora specifically. And then we will actually delve into a couple of case studies that we have experienced here at SEWA itself, and then taking that a little bit further and reimagining with you all of what justice means and how to better come together as a community.
The next slide for. So I'm not going to read the whole mission and vision for the organization, but I definitely want to talk about our organization. Just turned 20 years last year in 2024, being the only South Asian organization in Minnesota. And we have multiple programs. If we go to the next slide. So this organization came into existence because of the need of the violence prevention and intervention work back in 2004. But before that, a lot of volunteers were working and gathering, but they formalized the organization in 2004. And the framework is more family focused. It's a and that's where you find a lot of different programs in our organization, more than 15 major programs for all different groups of families, women, men, seniors, youth, LGBTQ plus identifying folks, neurodiversity, refugee population, and health. We have monthly free clinics for a lot of people who are underinsured or low insured, various ways to connect people together. It's all the programs are intergenerational, intersectional, and intentional to bring people together in this work and do more prevention and intervention work. We are the only organization focused on violence prevention and intervention as a core component to all the programming. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so we just wanted to take a little bit of time to introduce the frameworks restorative justice again and transformative justice. And first, we thought we would start with a pre-activity, kind of picking all of your brains a little bit here. I want you to go ahead and write in the chat, what do the words justice, punishment, accountability, and safety mean to you? And we'll just take about 2 minutes to do that. As they're coming, we'll read your responses out loud, but feel free to make them short, long, however these words mean to you. Go ahead. Okay. I'm reading, punishment feels hierarchical and dispensed by people in power. Accountability feels co-created. Justice feels subjective and fluid. And accountability, owning up to your part in something and following through on what you'll say you'll do. Yep, absolutely. To Nimisha, safety means living in a world where emotional, psychological, and physical dysregulation is not normalized. Justice is fairness and equity and ensuring that the individuals in vulnerable populations are treated with dignity and respect. These are wonderful. Keep coming. Safety to Janavi means emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual well-being in a way that is sustained and sustainable. And to Elizabeth, safety feels impossible in a systemic sense, but feels related to boundaries and relationships in a practical sense. Very much resonate with that one. Punishment should not always be about retribution, but about rehabilitation and learning. Absolutely. Wow, okay. So a lot of them just came at once. I'll read a couple more and then we can go further into the frameworks. Where was I? Accountability means recognizing the harm I caused, repairing the harm, and committing to growing, learning, and changing. Safety is also your basic needs and rights being fulfilled without having to worry about institutions threatening it. Okay, and then lastly, wow, okay. Thank you so much, Swati. That's amazing. Safety to me feels like it needs to be the central goal, mission of the process and what's prioritized, that without safety, there can be no justice. Okay, thank you so much for these responses. I hope that we can save the chat and we'll definitely read through them later. And I want to acknowledge them. But since we have a little bit of limited time, I thought maybe we'll move on and then we'll definitely be taking these responses back and reading through them. Okay, so I'm sure we all know this. So there's probably nothing new on this page, but for all of us as advocates, we know that violence is interconnected with capitalism, poverty, trauma, isolation, cis heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, misogyny, these are all the things, ableism, war displacement, and mass incarceration, all of the systems that we can name. We know that violence does not exist in a vacuum, that our experiences are intersectional, and many of us have personal communal experiences knowing that our people simply cannot rely on police and criminal justice systems. We know that our communities are actively being targeted right now for deportation and immigration concerns, constantly facing harassment and state-sanctioned violence and surveillance, and sexual violence and re-traumatization. And when we think about all of this, we know that there's also many different aspects of justice, including legal, individual, and social as well. So this is very, very brief because we just had the most amazing framework for us on what restorative justice actually is. So we actually took this definition from the SOAR's Transformative Justice workbook. And then, as Sujata just mentioned, these definitions have been crafted by Howard Zehr and other leaders of the restorative justice movement. So again, restorative justice is responding to a harm done and repairing the relationship between the person harmed and a harm doer at the most, basic definition. The three questions that Sujata just mentioned for us: are there shared values, principles, or practices of accountability between the person or community that's been harmed and the harm doer that can actually repair the relationship? So again, just like Sujata question, first we find out who has been hurt, who has been harmed, who has been hurt. What are this person's or this group's needs, and whose obligation is it to actually address these needs? And again, I apologize if I'm going very quickly. This is just our interpretation of transformative justice using the resources that we have and all the learnings that we've done so far. This is not, of course, the only definition. It's just what Mubina and I have taken from learning about it. So I hope that in this presentation, you're able to take from this, but also build upon it based off of your own experiences and your own definitions of transformative justice in either your culturally specific community or organization, etc. So again, actually, if you could go back for just a second, transformative justice is an expansion of those three principles of restorative justice. Yes, looking at what are the needs of the people who have been harmed, and as well as the needs of the harm doer, but also taking that a step further, what are the actual systems that have contributed to the harm being done? As I just explained, violence is connected with capitalism, with patriarchy, with misogyny, ableism, all of the racism, all of those isms are contributing to a harm being done, is what transformative justice recognizes. So is there a way knowing that violence and harm is not done in a vacuum, that it's multifaceted, what are the ways that these conditions can be transformed in order to achieve individual needs or collective needs? So transformative justice is more about taking the time to actually build the skills, the community, and the resources to navigate and eradicate the harm. And it's a long-term process. Nothing's going to take place right away, but when you spend the time to build the skills and build the community, then justice and healing can take place. Thank you, Amrita. This is just a quote from Mia Mingus, who is very commonly addressed as one of the practitioners of transformative justice. So I'm not going to spend time reading through it. I'll just highlight the most important parts. So TJ is a political framework and approach for responding to violence, harm, and abuse. At its most basic, it seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence and or engaging in harm reduction. Does not rely on the state, which includes the police, prisons, criminal legal system, ICE, and foster care system. And it does not perpetuate more violence, including surveillance or vigilantism. And yeah, at most keeps accountability, resilience, and safety for all, including the harm doer and the person who has been harmed. Okay, there's a lot on this slide as well. So just taking it a little bit further, again, transformative justice is an abolitionist theory and political framework that responds to violence, harm, and abuse. It's non-carceral, which means that it doesn't work in collaboration with carceral systems and hopes to eradicate the concepts of punishment, of retribution, by transforming ourselves, whatever perceptions we have, dynamics, interpersonal relationships, we can in turn transform our communities and transform into a more safer space, a space where healing is possible. And so by doing so, it requires us, both everyone who's involved, the people who have been harmed, the people who are perpetuating harm, everyone in the community, to take note of what values, practices, and relationships you have, the desires that you want to build. If you choose to transform the world, that starts with looking in with yourself and detailing out the values that you hold for yourself. And I've, of course, named many theorists. These are not a full-fledged list, but I do want to acknowledge the work that they've contributed to this. So Mia Mingus, Adrienne Marie Brown, Mariam Kaba, Shira Hassan, Dean Spade, Leah Lakshmi, Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samarasina, Harris Dixon, Dr. Mimi Kim, Generation 5, and so many more. And we'll list all the resources at the end, some of them. Yeah, just another quote again from Mia Mingus, and I'm not going to read through this one, but just keeping in mind who TJ was built from, which includes Black communities, immigrants, poor and low-income communities, communities of color, people with disabilities, disabled folks, sex workers, queer and trans communities. And the biggest takeaway from this quote that I'd like to acknowledge is that in many of these communities, along with our own diaspora, we've actually been practicing transformative justice in many different ways, and oftentimes hasn't come with the label of transformative justice. For generations, people have been doing this work. This is nothing new. So, yeah. Okay. And then taking this yet another step further into South Asia. I'm sorry if I'm going really fast. We are really excited about this topic, so we put in a lot of content and we're trying to get through as much as we can with our time. But we'll definitely share these slides later on and make ourselves accessible. So if you have any more questions or you want to talk through things, please definitely reach out to us. But we're very excited, and that's why there's a lot of words on the pages. So I apologize for that. Okay, so let me take a deep breath because I'm talking really fast. Okay, so as we mentioned, we have to take a look at the root causes of crime, punishment, safety, harm. Most of us here, if not all, are working in some capacity with South Asians, or those are our personal identities. We know that there's a longer history with colonization, with partitions, with civil wars, constitutions, along with globalization and majoritarian religious influences. Many of us are actively dealing with this right now and experiencing this in our community and personal lives. So we also know that in the South Asian diaspora, we subjects such as sex, sexual violence, domestic violence, sexual health, and legal systems, these are all, things that we can't necessarily talk about, or we haven't found the avenues to be able to access that with older generations, for example. But how do we actually free ourselves from these long histories of institutionalization and crime and punishment, religious guilt, generational trauma and different colonial and power structures with families and communities in order to actually transform into the world that we want to receive, we want to participate in? That's a huge task. But that's what TJ asks us to look at, is what are those longer histories that make up your own personal history, your own harm? How do you possibly move forward from that? This is just a graphic. We're all very well aware of this, but we know that South Asian communities are intersectional naturally. So intersections such as gender, caste, class, religion, color, age, ability or disability, and immigration status, and so many other things that have not been named here. Those very much affect the way that we walk every day. They affect our status in community. They affect the way that we perceive the world, all of that. And again, these intersections and marginalizations can cause people to become more vulnerable to violence, including interpersonal and community violence. We know that there's different hierarchies, like was mentioned before, within a structured society like the South Asian communities. We also can see that there is a difference in visibility between public sector violence and private sector violence. So violence in public sectors are much less normalized than the private and domestic violence examples. Yeah, and then so as an organization that advocates for South Asian survivors, we have directly seen how the criminal justice legal system has held many barriers for us and for survivors. We have experienced that justice is not always understood to be a multi-contextual issue, like the way that I've been describing. People don't understand how violence and justice are impacted by housing security, mental health, medical services. We know that it's not always accessible, affordable. There's no understanding of caste, gender, class intersections within the South Asian identities. Mubina and I Mubina was presenting on a panel recently to prosecutors in Hennepin County. And I was there to kind of support Mubina, and all the prosecutors in this space were white. I'm not exaggerating, every single one was white. And they were kind of shocked to even learn the basics of what is South Asian food, what is Latine food, etc. So like those are the basics that we had to start with in that panel. And then you want to talk about caste. That's another heavy barrier for South Asian survivors to access those systems. And then also important to note is not just the criminal legal system, but our own community, our own diaspora can cause us harm. Examples of that we face are violence by in-laws or caste-based violence, cultural norms, and stigmas and taboos that are placed on us. So knowing that as another example of harm, yes, absolutely, and faith leaders and cultural leaders. How do you separate yourself from your community? That's your community. The expectation from mainstream service providers or white service providers is that if they're the ones that are causing you harm or violence, then that's the expectation that you should just leave them. But that's not always possible for us. Yes, and then I think this might be the final slide on this section. I know that these are just some examples that I listed. There's many more definitions of restorative and transformative justice. A lot of times people bring up examples that are very similar. So if you have any examples of, how TJ is working in your spaces or how you've seen RJ in your communities, definitely share. So some examples, again, are storytelling circles or a mediator, Gulabi Gang, many of you might have heard of or seen, and a village Sanpanch leader. And then bringing that into the community, there's methods to tackle that, educational workshops, community events, and safety, potlucks, dance parties, etc.
Before we dwell into the case studies, I really want to again give the trigger warning. We tried to remove most of the critical triggering pieces, but still we wanted to be as realistic as possible. And these are the real cases we worked on, we held hands with. So the first case we have is about an older person. And I'm gonna read this and we'll have questions in the chat, and the next slide also has the questions. But I really want all of you, and we all want you to think about these from different perspectives, from individual perspective, with your lived experiences, with your ideology, your leaning, all of it, and also from the organizational perspective and with the capacities that you and your organization might have. So be careful, think, give yourself some time. 79-year-old Sunita, this person calls your hotline seeking help, sharing that her 85-year-old husband Sumit has been abusive for over a decade, and recently the violence escalated to physical harm. She's feeling worn down by the constant abuse and is no longer able to cope with the situation. However, Sunita is clear that she doesn't want to involve law enforcement, as she fears the potential consequences of police involvement, and she also doesn't want a divorce due to her age and the emotional and financial challenges of starting over at this age in her life. Instead, she asks if someone from your organization can call or meet with Sumit without her being involved, to threaten him into stopping the violence, the abuse. And she believes this is the only way to make him stop. And I want to also state here that almost 85 to 90% of our cases do not want to involve law enforcement. The remaining 10% probably call 911 because of the excessive physical abuse. or the abuser has called or involved the law enforcement somehow. So take some 5 minutes to read and think through the case scenario from different perspectives. And the next slide has the questions.
I'll send them in the chat so you can just stay on that page and then
Perfect.
take a couple minutes to reflect about it. I'll send the questions in the chat.
So please reflect on, does Sunita's response make you feel conflicted? What are the limitations in acting upon Sunita's wish? How can transformative justice principles be applied to Sunita's situation to address the root causes of her abuse, while respecting her desire for safety and decision to avoid law enforcement or divorce? And the third one is, in which ways can restorative justice principles be used to hold Sumit accountable for his actions and create an opportunity for healing and change in both his and Sunita's lives? I'm going to quickly read, but also would like people to read silently on their own. And Aarti is going to pose the questions in the chat for people to think and reflect on. Rehanna, a first-generation immigrant and an Urdu-speaking survivor of transnational abandonment, physical and emotional violence, is a mother to a 5-year-old son. After enduring years of abuse, she decides to file for an order for protection, OFP, against her husband, her abuser. With your support, she meticulously gathers evidence for the evidentiary hearing. On the day of the hearing, the abuser unexpectedly agrees to accept the order without contesting it, avoiding a formal hearing. The court grants the OFP, offering Rehanna immediate protection from him. However, as the judge concludes the hearing, Rehanna's emotions overwhelm her. Tears fill her eyes, and she voices her frustration, saying, "This is not proving him guilty. Ye kaisa insaf hai? What kind of justice is this?" And we want you to imagine yourself being in the courtroom with this survivor and being there with her and validating, or how do you want to respond? How are you going to respond? How can you, as a culturally specific advocate, effectively validate her feelings of frustration and emotional pain, ensuring she feels heard and understood while navigating the complexities of legal and cultural justice? Also, how can you incorporate principles of transformative and restorative justice into Rehanna's journey, ensuring that both her need for safety and her desire for healing, accountability, and community restoration are met?
Link. I don't know if any of you have used Padlet. It's very similar to a Jamboard. And I'm pasting in the chat right now. Basically, what I want you to do is, and Amrita, if you wouldn't mind just quickly clicking on the link and then showing them how it works. This is just a creative way to put down all of our collective ideas. Basically, you can, exactly. So there's 3 different questions here. There's 2 slides for each question. The first question being, how can we practice restoration and transformation in gender-based violence work? How can we, what does accountability look like in the South Asian diaspora? And how can we redefine safety for survivors? These are actually questions that I've been thinking of in the last couple of days as well. A lot of transformative justice principles resonate with folks. I've been hearing very similar things as I've been scanning the vision board and all those Q&As. So a lot of these similar questions have come up. What you can do on the right, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th button on the right, you can add a sticky note like that. Yep, note, make it whatever color you want, and then post it onto the slide itself. And then you can add text immediately to answer the question. If you click on where it says +16, you can, I think, draw yourself. You can add images, whatever you would like to do. I'm posting the link there, and I'm hoping that you all can do this even after you leave our session today, because we really want this to be representative of the dialogue that we've shared. And these ideas of transformation that's not going anywhere, it's all on purpose for all of us to make better opportunities and better communities for our survivors. So I'm sorry that we couldn't delve too deeply into this, but keep responding to these, and Mubina and I will actually take these and use them for our programming. And Amrita, if I would have you go back to the slideshow one more time. And thank you so much to both Nahian and Amrita for doing this for us. We are a little bit chaotic today, so thank you both. And then in the next slide, I just wanted to leave something with you that a new world, a liberatory world, is possible. We've already been doing multiple examples, multiple practices of liberation, transformation. They exist within our cultures, they exist within our communities. So if we can better analyze how to analyze the connections between interpersonal communication and structures, that'll allow us to make for a more transformative society. At the core, we always must center survivors. Survivor boundaries and agency is most crucial. So the perpetrators or the harm doers are always accountable to someone, whether that's the survivor or the person harmed, the community, but they're also accountable to themselves, and their needs do factor into possibilities as well. So some of the themes that TJ invokes in me, and I hope that it invokes in all of you when you get to your responses on the sticky notes. TJ allows for community safety, resiliency, accessible and culturally specific healing, harm reduction, and so many more. And in the last slide, or next slide, that's just one example from Sujata Baliga on her experience with restorative justice, which is very cool. So I hope that I can send a link really quickly. I know I'm over time. There's also resources in here. We'll share the slides. And in the last slide, we have our contact information if you would like to talk further with Mubina or I. So I think in the very last slide.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all your wisdom and experiences and everything with us. Thank you.